During the Red Army's winter offensive in East Prussia, Soviet forces successfully severed Army Group North into three segments, effectively isolating the East Prussian forces. On January 29th, elements of the 3rd Belarusian Front reached the Baltic Sea coast, completing the encirclement of Königsberg. Following the tragic demise of General Cherniakovsky, Lieutenant General Vasilevsky assumed command of the 3rd Belarusian Front and resolved to defeat the German formations cornered against the sea, segment by segment. By the end of March, south of Königsberg, the most combat-ready 4th German Army had been vanquished. The next phase of the East Prussian operation was to be the elimination of the enemy's forces within the fortress city of Königsberg. The task of capturing the city was assigned to the 3rd Belarusian Front under Marshal Vasilevsky. To bolster its strength, the Zemland Operational Group of troops, formed from the 1st Baltic Front under Army General Belorussian, was incorporated into the front. A formidable force exceeding 100,000 personnel, comprising 5,200 artillery pieces and mortars, 634 tanks, and heavy caliber guns, was assembled for the assault on the city. Specifically, howitzers of various calibers, inherited by the Red Army from the Russian Empire and dating back to the First World War, were employed to demolish the fortifications. Additionally, B-4 500mm mortars, a Soviet design, participated in the destruction of the forts. Meticulous preparation preceded the offensive, with all urban defenses meticulously photographed from the air and replicated on an exact scale model of the fortress. Unit commanders meticulously rehearsed the assault plan. It is noteworthy that immediately before the decisive Soviet offensive, the Germans managed to re-establish communication between Königsberg and the Zemland Group, forming a unified defensive front by early April. The fortress was defended by Wehrmacht and Volksturm units totaling up to 100,000 men, equipped with over 5,000 artillery pieces and mortars. Königsberg, the capital of East Prussia, had long been fortified as a German stronghold in the east, boasting an elaborate system of defensive structures. Ancient bastions were augmented by a chain of modern reinforced concrete forts encircling the city. 3 defensive lines were established. The outermost perimeter comprised 15 old forts interconnected by a unified fire system, each designed for all-around defense. Between these forts, continuous trenches and anti-tank ditches were constructed. In turn, the city's outskirts featured a second line, incorporating stone buildings, barricades, reinforced concrete firing positions, and finally, a 3rd defensive line. Lorsch was confident that Königsberg could withstand the Soviet onslaught for months. Nearly all local male residents were mobilized for the city's defense. Furthermore, in the summer of 1944, the Royal Air Force had conducted 2 devastating air raids on Königsberg's residential areas and historic center, hardening the resolve of its inhabitants to resist to the bitter end. Alongside the garrison troops, fighting in the initial days of April saw relative lulls. However, the city's defenses required preemptive destruction before the general assault. Initially, the assault was scheduled for April 5th, with an artillery bombardment of German positions planned to commence on the 1st. However, weather conditions intervened. Due to heavy rain and fog, artillery reconnaissance was postponed to April 2nd, and the assault on the East Prussian capital was rescheduled to the 3rd. Commander of the 5th Guards Rifle Regiment, Fyodor Fedotov, recalled, "In the morning of April 3rd, the large-caliber guns began to fire. Our aviation hung over Königsberg. The pilots also hammered the forts and pillboxes. The city literally vanished in a sea of fire and smoke." During the initial days of April, extensive mine-clearing operations were also conducted, with sappers creating paths through minefields. On April 5th, a reconnaissance in force was carried out, and on the following day, after an hour of artillery preparation, under the cover of a firestorm, infantry and tanks launched a simultaneous offensive from the north and south, commencing the assault on Königsberg. Partially destroyed forts number 8 and 10 were unable to offer significant resistance. They were neutralized by rifle battalions supported by assault guns and sappers with demolition charges, after which storming groups continued their advance. However, upon reaching the city's residential areas, the Red Army's advance slowed due to adverse weather, rendering aviation almost inactive once more. Nevertheless, despite tenacious resistance, by dawn, our forces had breached the first defensive ring, penetrating enemy lines several kilometers deep. The epicenter of the battle was near the Scharburg and Lindendorf forts. Storming units encountered particular difficulty at Charlottenburg, whose walls resisted even 246-kilogram shells. It was then that the sappers played a crucial role. The commander of a sapper platoon, a future hero of the Soviet Union, along with his men, managed to reach the very walls of Charlottenburg and placed a special charge composed of explosives and captured mines. The resulting explosion created a breach in the fort's wall, through which a storming detachment entered and decisively suppressed German resistance. Subsequently, Siderov's method was applied to other Königsberg forts. On April 7th, the weather finally improved, allowing Soviet aviation to make a significant contribution. In the afternoon, 516 long-range bombers flew over Königsberg for 45 minutes. In total, on that day, front aviation dropped over 1,200 tons of bombs on the city. The primary targets for the bombers were German reserves, intended to be destroyed before soldiers and officers occupied positions in trenches, and within the citadel buildings. After the bombing, chaos reigned in the city. Communication between the garrison headquarters and the troops was disrupted. Fires broke out, and numerous depots of ammunition and provisions were destroyed. Nevertheless, the Königsberg garrison continued to resist and actively counterattacked. All available reserves were thrown into the battle. Hitler issued a defiant order to the garrison. Our forces advanced 4 kilometers, capturing 130 city blocks under Soviet control. The northwestern part of the city came under Soviet control. Advancing assault detachments occupied the port, the railway station, and several important industrial facilities. The decisive moment arrived, determining the fate of the garrison. The commandant requested permission to surrender the fortress with the remaining forces, but General Lorsch refused. Later, permission was finally received, but it was hopelessly late. In the latter half of April 8th, troops of the 1st Guards Army crossed the Pregel River and, in the region of Emiliano, linked up with units advancing from the north. Attempts by the enemy to break through from the outside to connect with the Königsberg garrison were thwarted by airstrikes. The Germans were forced to retreat into the city center and its eastern part, towards Kaltenhof. Further resistance, without supplies and external support, became pointless. Marshal Vasilevsky extended an offer of surrender to the commandant of Königsberg, but it was rejected. On the morning of April 9th, the Soviet offensive resumed. Units of the 1st Guards Army engaged in combat for the central city blocks, in close proximity to Lorsch's command post located at University Square. The final blow was being prepared to commence at 1900 hours. However, at the same time, emissaries were dispatched to the Soviet command for negotiations regarding surrender. The commandant accepted the ultimatum and ordered an immediate cessation of resistance. Nevertheless, the resistance of individual units continued even after this order. But by 6 o'clock in the morning of April 10th, the city was completely cleared of German troops. Upon learning of the garrison's surrender, Hitler, in a fit of rage, sentenced the commandant of Königsberg, Lorsch, to death in absentia. In total, as a result of the assault, over 70,000 German soldiers and officers were taken prisoner. Approximately 34,000 Wehrmacht soldiers and Volksturm detachments perished in the street fighting. Over 2,000 artillery pieces of various calibers, nearly 90 tanks and self-propelled guns, and numerous units of various combat equipment were captured as trophies. The operation to capture Königsberg was completed in a matter of days with minimal losses. The assault lasted only 81 hours. According to the 3rd Belarusian Front headquarters, from April 1st to April 10th, irretrievable losses during the city's storming amounted to 3,506 individuals. Slightly over 13,300 Red Army soldiers were wounded. The German chapter of the East Prussian capital's history had come to an end. After the war, by decision of the Potsdam Conference, the northern part of East Prussia became part of the Soviet Union. Königsberg became a Soviet city, renamed Kaliningrad in 1946. The capture of the city vividly demonstrated the increased professionalism of the Red Army. Soviet troops operated confidently in assault groups, both in combat against field defenses and in urban warfare. Close coordination between infantry, armored vehicles, sappers, and artillerymen enabled the rapid and effective destruction of resistance centers. Unlike positional battles of the 1930s, Soviet troops now possessed numerous artillery pieces and aircraft. Under these conditions, enemy defenses were successfully crushed. The capture of Königsberg became one of the symbols of the Red Army's victories in the concluding period of the war. Following the battles, 216 soldiers and officers were awarded the title of Hero of the Soviet Union. After the war, commander of the Baltic Fleet, Army General Golovko, recalled the fall of the proud fortress of Königsberg, as well as the strategically vital port of Pilo on the Baltic Sea. This represented not only a loss of crucial strongholds in East Prussia for the Germans, but, above all, a severe, irreparable moral blow. The Germans' last hopes of preserving a strategic bridgehead in the east and their aspirations of transferring some forces from the Western Front to other sectors were dashed. An important outcome on this front was that our Baltic fleet gained first-class naval ports, Königsberg and Pilo, equipped for the basing and repair of naval vessels of almost all classes. The expediency, success, and relatively low losses incurred by Soviet troops in the Königsberg operation against the enemy, in accordance with one of Suvorov's principles of military science, to conquer not by numbers but by skill,